In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what's the scariest, creepiest, or most unsettling experience you've ever had?
Walking towards a pack of howling wild dogs on the other side of a bush line, going to get rid of them to protect cattle. Several hundred meters away, they got our scent on the wind. Those howls turned to growls and snarls. 10-year-old me booked it back home. That moment you realize they know you and where you are was creepy. Edit. Obligatory. This blew up. Posted when I went to bed, highest rated comment, and minor text fixes. To clear something up for everyone asking, I was with my dad and 17-year-old brother. They were both armed. When we got in growling range and heard them, I freaked, looked at Dad and said, "I'm going home," and legged it downhill toward my house. Dad said later he didn't even think my legs touched the ground. I was going that fast. I remember coming to a barbed wire fence and not even slowing down, just dove into an army roll under it and kept going. Dad and my brother continued on. When they got around the corner of the trees and in sight, one adult and 4 half-grown pups charged them. Brother froze. Dad saw that the alpha was still sitting and growling, so he took a quick pot shot. Just missed, but it was enough to scare them off.
When I was around 16, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I'd spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of time fondly remembering things we used to do in the house as we were packing everything up. At some point, I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read, something I used to do when I was younger to get some peace and quiet. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes under the stairs. It went back around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot-high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this was the most fluffy spot to sit and read. About an hour in, I shifted a little to get comfortable, and I heard a low, slow, warped, hoarse voice say, "You always make me happy." I flipped my stuff, hit my head on the low ceiling, and practically broke the door down getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no color left on my face, I went back to see what it was. It was my stuffed little bear from when I was 3 or 4 years old that I happened to lean on just right to press his belly. When I pressed his stomach again, though, nothing. This poor bear I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power, used its dying breath, to tell me I made it happy. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me piss myself.
This is not paranormal, but was immensely creepy at the time. I was visiting my hometown and decided to pick up my old high school friend from his house and take him to dinner and a drink to catch up. He was kind of stressed and told me that his ex, with whom he had broken up over 2 years prior, had been stalking and harassing him. I drove him home afterwards and it started to drizzle. As I dropped him off at his house, the neighborhood was dark and quiet by now, we both noticed a bag tied to my side view mirror. It was likely attached when we were at the restaurant. We opened it to see a poorly taken photo of a tree at night, with flash. There was a brief letter, obviously written by his ex, that said, "I buried our first love letter under this tree years ago. This tree is growing from our love." I made sure my friend got into his house all right and got the heck out of there.
Although nobody believes me, I know what I saw. And it wasn't a stealth bomber. I was about 14. And at about 10:30, I was in bed trying to fall asleep on a school night. I started to hear a hum that quickly began growing in intensity as whatever was making it got closer. So I bent the blinds on the window behind me and peered out. Something bright was steadily approaching, and it was flying very low. As it got closer, I began to see more detail. In the middle was a bright white sphere. It had long shafts coming out radially from this central sphere. At the end of each of these shafts, maybe 10-15 in total, was a smaller sphere, each illuminated with a different color, noticeably dimmer than the central sphere. It zoomed right overhead. Couldn't have been more than 20 feet over my house. I ran downstairs and told my parents. They told me to go back to bed. The next day, I told my friends and teachers. They laughed at me. They suggested it was probably a stealth bomber because there's an AFB nearby, and stealth bomber sightings aren't rare. This thing was the opposite of stealthy, so I have no idea what it was. But I'll never forget the night I saw the psychedelic sombrero.
My family told me this. I had fever very often when I was young. The medicines didn't help. One day, a stranger on the street asked my mom if I was always sick and who was the elderly following me. My mom was confused as there was no elderly nearby. The stranger pointed into the air and described my dead paternal grandmother's look, the hairstyle and clothes she wore to her grave. My dad was from a different town and my mom would have known it if the stranger was a mutual friend. The stranger instructed my dad to call my grandmother to go back. my mysterious fevers stopped.
When I was a teen, I worked at a cable access studio and made mini movies. My neighbors gave me their father's old video camera. They told me he never used it, but it didn't seem to work anymore and had a tape jammed in it. I fixed it up, and on the tape was hours of him driving around at night and filming people through their windows. Nothing inappropriate was on it, but there is something unsettling about seeing peeping Tom footage of a guy eating dinner with his family or over 20 minutes of some girls dancing around in their room.
When I was about 7 or 8 years old, my family rented a house close to the beach for a week. The drive wasn't very long, but as an 8-year-old, by the time we got there, I really had to feed the porcelain stallion a brown bone. We pulled into the driveway and were met by a middle-aged woman who owned the house. She showed us around, told us about the town, and what there was to do nearby. My first instinct was to find the bathroom, so I asked, and she told me it was the second door on the right after the kitchen. I went inside, opened the bathroom door, and there was an older man just standing there looking at me. I kind of ducked my head down, said sorry, and went back outside. They noticed I was back pretty quickly, and I told them there was someone in the bathroom already. That's when it got strange. The lady looked confused and said there was no one else in the house. I explained that I definitely saw someone in that bathroom. After searching the place, we found no evidence of anyone being there. After a while, the lady told us her dad had owned the house and lived there before he recently passed away. She had inherited the house and wasn't sure what to do with it, so she started renting it out. Pretty sure I saw that man.
I was more traumatized by the euphemism, feed the porcelain stallion a brown bone, to be honest.
I posted this a few years ago, but I volunteered as an EMT in a small village just outside NYC when I was a senior in high school and during my first few years of college. One night, we were on call not only for our town, but also for 2 neighboring villages that were out of service. One of them wasn't exactly the safest area. Normally, we'd have a police officer meet us at every scene since they could get there faster. But that night, there was a fire on the other side of town and an ongoing investigation elsewhere, so the police were stretched thin. We got a call about a 25-year-old male with a facial wound, supposedly waiting in the backyard of a private residence. There was no police backup, no advanced life support, just me and my driver. That's technically normal for some agencies, but it definitely didn't feel normal that night. When we arrived, we pulled into the yard behind an apartment building. My driver spotted the patient sitting in the shadows, almost like he was hiding. Something about it felt wrong, so I flipped on the floodlights. The second the lights came on, we saw about 5 to 7 guys standing there, holding tire irons and baseball bats. My driver immediately threw the ambulance in reverse and we got the hell out of there. I jumped on the radio to call for help. Turns out those guys were planning to ambush us, steal narcotics from the ambulance, and take the rig for a joyride. Except as a basic life support unit, we didn't even carry narcotics. To this day, I still think about what could have happened if we just walked up to that patient. TLDR. Volunteered as an EMT, almost got ambushed on a call one night.
I worked at a movie theater selling concessions when this older man approached the counter to order. I asked him, "Would you like anything else?" And he looked at me and said, "Every time I ask for the thing I want, they keep telling me it's illegal." I was already creeped out, but I just gave an awkward chuckle. Then he said, "Do you want to know what I ask for?" Part of working concessions is being polite to customers, so I hesitantly said, "Sure." What came next was honestly one of the most disturbing things I've ever heard. He started talking about wanting young girls and said things about keeping them locked up so he could pick them up whenever he wanted. At this point, a line was already forming behind him, and he hadn't even paid yet. I just wanted the conversation to end, so I told him his total. He looked at me and said, "You understand, right?" I was completely in shock and didn't know how to respond, so I just gave an uncomfortable, nervous chuckle and muttered, "Sure," hoping he'd leave. He then put a $10 bill in the tip jar, said, "I like you," and walked away. Edit. To clarify, when I said agree, I didn't mean I actually agreed with him. I was so uncomfortable and shocked that I just said sure to end the conversation as quickly as possible.
Cop here. I've posted this before, so it might sound familiar. I was dispatched to a house around 1 a.m. for a prowler call. We got there and talked to the residents. Long story short, they said they'd seen 2 people wearing masks. One was a Jason-style hockey mask, I don't remember the other, in the yard across the street. It was about 2 weeks after Halloween, so it sounded plausible. We checked the area and didn't see anything. 10-8. It's worth noting the residents didn't seem drunk, high, or unstable at all. Sometimes you'll get a call like that and find the person's imagining things, but this wasn't that. About an hour later, we get called back. This time, dispatch keeps the residents on the phone while we're surrounding the area. We, about 5 of us, are in perfect position. Dispatch tells us the residents can still see the prowlers in the next yard. We start to move in. Dispatch says the residents just watched the 2 masked people wave and move into the shed. Guess where I am? That's right next to the shed. I give verbal commands, bang on the door, nothing. Fine. I open the door and empty. I even check for a trap door, nothing. The shed's raised about 4 inches, so there's no hidden exit either. Again, we search the whole area, nothing. I go back and talk to the residents. They said as I was moving in on the shed, the 2 put their finger to their lips, the sign, waved, and then moved into the shed as I was right next to it. We went over every possibility trying to explain it. If the caller was messing with us, there was no history of prank calls from that address. I'm not much of a believer in paranormal stuff, but that night left me with no logical explanation.
Back when I worked night shift as a security guard, I used to get mild visual tricks from my terrible sleep schedule. One night during my patrol, I was feeling especially out of it, so I kept catching flashes of movement in the corner of my eye. But I figured it was just my tired brain playing games. At the site I worked, there was a huge warehouse filled with chemical waste, with only one light left on inside. As I walked past, I saw a pale shape on the ground and instantly recognized what looked like a body. My adrenaline spiked and I froze for a second. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a CPR dummy the workers had left out from training earlier. Edit. Since people are curious, passed out probably isn't the right term. My mind just blanked for a second while my brain tried to process what I was seeing. I was genuinely terrified because I thought I'd stumbled onto something serious. And as an unarmed guard more than a mile from help, that's a pretty awful feeling. Turns out, my imagination was working overtime.
When I was around 10 or 11, I came down with pneumonia. Toward the end of my week off from school, my mom started leaving me home alone during the day while she went to work. Every morning, I'd wake up, turn on my N64, and play No Mercy. I always sat on the edge of the bed right in front of the TV. About an hour into playing one day, I clearly felt someone sit down next to me. I froze. There was no one else in the house. I panicked, dropped the controller, and ran out of the room to call my mom. Later that night, I found out my grandmother had passed away that morning.
Sleep paralysis. The worst is when you can feel something sit down on your bed.
I've had a few rounds of sleep paralysis. Once I realized what it was, it became fascinating. I usually hear people whispering my name and some banging noises. The only difficult part is that sometimes I can't breathe and then I suddenly wake up, gasping for air.
Paranormal or not, what's the scariest, most unsettling, or creepiest experience you've ever had? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe.